Welcome to the second lesson that we are going to have for the introduction to the philosophy of the human person. Welcome to the discussion for Module 2, which is about methods of philosophizing. For this, I'm going to share a screen. Give me a few seconds. There. Yeah, I think you can see the PowerPoint now. The PowerPoint on the methods of philosophizing. Last week's discussion was quite anchored on why people have to philosophize, what's the need for it, and what will people get from it. We traced it to our nature, to that innate tendency of man to really ask and wonder, that man has desires that cannot be easily satisfied, and so man would tend to keep on asking and asking plenty of questions until such time that his desire to know these things are met. His desire is met. Also, we went with trying to look at the origin or the etymology of philosophy, and we bridged that definition with what we do of philosophy now. On that end, we go with this discussion of the methods of philosophizing. This really takes its course in knowing what is truthful. Our knowledge is comprised of ideas and beliefs that we know to be true. We would not include any information. Our minds have been kind of preset into thinking that the information it stores is what it believes to be true. The knowledge that has been stored, that has been formulated and kept in our respective minds, is made up of several experiences, ideas, and beliefs which we consider to be true. But what is really the perspective? What is one's perspective on truth? Accordingly, a belief is true if it can be justified or proven through the use of one's sense. This is one perspective that so many are actually trying to believe in for one truth to be considered a truth. If it's an experience that cannot be perceived, if the senses, because I'm using the word perceive here, because the senses, the use of senses would result to perception. If it's one that cannot be perceived, that had not undergone through one's senses, then people would say that it's not true at all. This would even spark, this had even sparked that long, I think it's a dead proposition as well, that long-standing debate on the reality of God. Because many would say that they are to believe if they see God for themselves. But what does religion say of the reality of God? That the reality of God is through our experience with other people. Because God exists, on the idea that God exists in all of us and God is everywhere, that goes into saying that we are experiencing our existence in this world with God around us. But there are really others who are really empirical and they wish to see for themselves the physical form of God. And so they want that, they think that God isn't real, that God isn't true, because not one of the many senses that they have could could support the existence of that divine being. Though religion has something to say about it, still there's this perspective of truth. And at some point, there's also a particular level of uh, truthfulness in this statement. In the lesson on methods of philosophizing, these are the important terms that we have to also accept. Facts. What are facts? Facts contain ideas or information that have already been verified. They're easily verifiable, and in fact, apart from them to be still verified, there are so many facts around us that have already been accepted as general truths. widespread truths, because in so many occasions they've already been proven, in so many experiments and tests they've already been proven, and so they've been turned into facts. We also have opinions. Opinions go beyond providing facts. What do they provide instead? They provide conclusions and perspectives regarding certain situations. And at some point, they become the basis for making arguments, and also in our attempt to convince people that a certain fact, certain claim is a fact. Let's point out that part of the definition that says these are perspectives regarding certain situations. And that's what makes opinions subjective. That's what makes opinions varied from one person's perspective to another person's perspective. Because one person's situation might be different from another person's situation. Take for instance the feeling of sadness. Someone might say that feeling of sadness is not true when I lose a friend, while others would say it is true when I lose a friend that feeling of sadness comes out. Person A would say it is not true because when I lost that friend, I was able to gain more, and I was able to find myself even further in my loss of a friend. Person B will say that made me feel so sad because I lost an important person in my life. See, they come from varying situations. And that's what makes the differences in their perspectives and conclusions. Thus, an opinion. Is an opinion generally acceptable or widely acceptable? Not, it does not always follow that that should be the case. I mean, the fact that it is based on situations that would challenge the generalizability of opinions. Conclusions. These are judgments based on certain facts. So we need facts to support our judgment, which is then labeled as a conclusion. Important terms. Beliefs. These beliefs express our convictions. They are not, though, clearly and easily explained by facts. For whatever it is that we just believe to be true, they take part of our list or pool of beliefs. They may not be supported by anything factual, but if we already make them part or register them in our list of what we consider truthful, then we count them as our beliefs. Like religion, people's religious beliefs vary. Our religious beliefs might be supported by our own claims only, and we don't have all of the facts to support them. And we cannot just simply pinpoint at other people's religions to be not factual, not to be wrong. We may have facts for our own, they may also have facts to support their own. If they throw in something to challenge our beliefs, that does not make them to be absolutely right, because that's our kind of conviction compared to theirs. In the same way, we cannot throw anything against them freely whenever we feel like it, because that's also their share of beliefs. Explanations. Explanations are statements that assume the claim to be true and provide reasons why that statement is also true. These statements give us further understanding of why something is considered truthful or untruthful. At some point, when explanations are provided or made, we insert them with facts. We do our best to insert them with facts so that our claims come out to be acceptable and truthful. Arguments. These arguments include a series of statements that provide reasons to convince the reader or listener that a claim or opinion is truthful or perhaps untruthful. Arguments go together with explanations. Given that this is your argument, such argument is provided with plenty of explanations. Within those explanations, we insert facts. For whatever it is that comes out to be convincing, acceptable, we include that information in our stock of knowledge. And that's what we consider to be truthful. I mean, you've had your share of doing debate. In your experience of debate, That proposition that floated is what we are fighting for to be truthful or untruthful. To support your side in that debate, you provided arguments. But you didn't just mention arguments on their own. You provided explanations to elaborate your arguments. And that's what created your side of the proposition, which supposedly contributed to the formulation of that proposition into a truthful knowledge. We've been talking of truth and knowledge, so let's try to go deeper into them. Truth lies at the heart of any inquiry, and it is a fact that has been already verified. While knowledge in itself is just a storage of data, or this corresponds to simple data that comes from the outside that passes to our senses as perceptions, as perceived, or going through the process of perception. Knowledge must be truthful to gain validity and acceptance. That is why the requirement for senses needs to be met. The sensing of these experiences, the sensing of these information or data will provide the validity, that eventually the acceptance of that data, making it a part of our knowledge. There are also propositions that are crafted in relation to knowledge and truth. Philosophers consider truth as a kind of quality or value, and propositions in relation to this are considered statements about the world or reality which may or may not carry some truth. And so we fight we fight over propositions. We talk over propositions and we try to validate whether the idea behind the proposition is true or not. What is truth then? And why is it important to know the truth? Knowledge, it is said here, is the clear awareness and understanding of something. And it is in fact the product of questions that allow for clear answers provided by facts. Eventually, what we know is what is observable or evident in the real world. And that makes it really important to know the truth. What you know makes up your version of the real world. What you consider to be part of your stock knowledge, to this knowledge that you have in mind, is what constitutes your version of the real world. Take, for instance, again, the question or the debate on the reality of God. If there's a person out there who would say, I do not believe in God because I have not seen Him, I have not heard Him, nor have I felt Him physically. So that is that person's version of the real world. That will be his version of the world where he is in, which will be in constant rubbing against the world of those who believe in the existence of that divine being. For the person who says, I believe in God because I know that I'm experiencing Him through the people around me. I may not see Him physically, but I could see Him in the life of every person I encounter every day. That is person B's version of reality. That is his version of his world, of the real world, because I will put you on mute, ha. That is his version of the real world because that's part of the knowledge that has already been developed inside his mind. Oh, wait. There. Moreover, in the context of knowing why truth is really important, we are reminded that propositions are observed to be real or truthful, and that's what makes them factual. There are statements, however, that are not evidently or immediately known to be true, and they are called claims. What will they require for them to be considered true? They require further examination to establish their truthfulness or falsehood. How do we know then that something is true? There are four important conditions that we should be reminded of, and these are: first, if it can be proven or justified through the use of one's senses. The physical world would demand that something is true only if it can be proven or justified through the use of one's senses. If it cannot be, then philosophy would say that it is not true. Second, something is true if it is based on facts. And for one to be based on facts, it's been tested, it has been tested, it has stood through the challenges of time. Several supports have been made of it. Also, something is true if it is a product of agreement or consensus. That's why earlier I said, is it already a widespread information? Because if it is, that makes it agreed by many, consensual. The consensus and or the agreement of the majority has been met. And if that's the case, people will consider that idea to be truthful. And lastly, it can be applied in real life. Since it was tested and verifiable and verified, then there's no reason why it cannot be put into real life application. In that case, knowledge is seen to be part of truth, to be considered true or truthful. This is where again I'd like to bring up the discussion on religion. And in so many times, religion and philosophy would not meet at a common point. This is philosophy's version of truth. Will all of these jive with what religion says? Not all of them. Especially condition number one. Condition number one would put so many events in religion to be quite a challenge. Condition number one would, if someone eventually embraces philosophy, condition number one would make him or her doubt his religious affiliations because of that requirement that the experience through the use of one's senses will have to be met. But for the purpose of philosophy in our subject, let's consider these four. The thing is, in as much as we want to know something to be true, in as much as we want to assume that something is factual, there are instances, if not us, where the people around us would resort to faulty reasoning just so they'd be able to attain a claim to be truthful over other claims. For faulty reasoning, we are then talking of fallacies, which are arguments based on reasoning that is not right. And some of them may be intentional, as the person making the claim is desperate to convince you to accept his or her argument. It may even come out to be too convincing because there are people who are so good in the making of these fallacies that they package their ideas in a way that would appear to be really convincing to whosoever is listening to them. When you were with me in debate grade 9, I think you've had your share of having fallacies, no? Though not of all of them were mentioned not all of these ones are mentioned in your experience when you were in grade 9. Hopefully you'll find something quite common, like these fallacies. To start, we have the AdHominem fallacy. How do we translate AdHominem in simple terms? We refer to that as a personal attack. What happens here is that we are attacking the person instead of the argument itself. What can it aim or what does it aim to do? Attacking the person tries to intimidate the other with the hope that that other person gets discouraged and be more convinced that since his characteristics or his persona is ruined, then the person who ruined it is a better person. Ergo, a person who is a source of a truth. For example, of course, he believes that the government is flawed. He is a rebel and a communist. The pronoun he there refers to the other person. Calling him a rebel or a communist is already an attack. When this argumentation is about the government to be either flawed or not, what the other speaker did, what person A did, was to point out the characteristics of person B, and those characteristics have nothing to do with the line of argumentation. But what was the purpose of person A in doing so? Person A would like to point out that person B is claiming for the government to be flawed because person B already acts as the person who works against a flawed government. A rebel and a communist is one who sees that the present government is flawed. I mean, to whosoever finds this video, disclaimer, to whosoever finds this video, I am not referring to the government that we have right now. I'm not attacking the present government. I am just doing the discussion for the purpose of this lesson. I might see later on in my YouTube channel comments ba, how can you say that the government of our president is flawed? This is not about that. This is just about this fallacy. Another fallacy, the ad baculum fallacy, argument. Before you label them with the word argumentum, no? Argumentum ad hominem. Argumentum ad baculum or ad baculum. For the purpose of this discussion, put away the word argumentum aside. Just look at ad baculum, ad hominem, and so on. Ad baculum, also known as the appeal to force. What will the speaker do in this point? The speaker uses threat or force or anything undesirable or any undesirable event to advance an argument or to convince the other side. For instance, if you do not agree with my political opinions, you will receive flat 70 on your card. I hope no teacher did this to you. I hope no teacher tried to threaten you, impose any form of fear or threat, just so you'd accept the idea of that teacher. Because I think this is, given that it's talking of a report card and a grade of 70, this is in a classroom setup, which in this case obviously uses the appeal to force. Ad misericordiam, or the appeal to pity, where in such case emotions are used instead. Emotions which are in appeal to pity and sympathy are being used, compromising the quality of the argument. Like this: you can't fire me. I have a wife and 12 kids who will go hungry if I lose this job. In the actual course of a debate, if someone points out to mercy and would appeal so much to the audience in terms of how sympathetic the speaker already sounded, that is also an appeal to pity or an ad misericordiam fallacy. I may have mentioned it earlier, there are others who are already so good at this that the viewers or the listeners or the audience would get easily convinced because the approach to them is what mattered more over what was said. It was more of how it was said than what was actually said in the argumentation that would matter to these people. As harsh as it sounds, I think I gave it to your class when you were in grade 9. Our listening population is composed of, I don't know if it's with your class or with another class. The listening population is composed of 90% emotional people and 10% intellectuals. That if you speak to them with emotion in your voice, they'd be sympathizing with you and they would forget the content of what you said. Generally, the population is composed of these people. You just have to cry and appeal to emotions and they'll be with you. You just have to post something online, you cry about it, you feel like you're the victim, you present yourself as the victim of the situation, and you'll get the sympathy of the people. Yet, if someone tries to rationalize it and will say, wait, actually it's your fault because You acted as though you didn't know. You acted like you didn't know what's going to happen. That's the consequence of your action. The one who responded intellectually would even be bashed by the people who only used their emotions. Because again, so many of the people out there would let their emotions get the better of them than their heads. I've known of one. I've known of one who I hope this person finds this video online. I will not name the person. I've known of one person. This really happened. This really happened. I've known of one person who wanted to fly back to Manila. The person wanted to fly back to Manila. And then, on her flight back, the person brought a lot of things to the point that her luggage exceeded the luggage capacity. As it turns out, that excess resulted to an amount of 12,000 pesos. The excess led to an amount of 12,000. You know what that person did in the airport, in the city airport? This happened in Bohol. This happened in Bohol. You know what that person did in the airport in the city? That person kept on yelling and yelling and yelling. So that was like an appeal to force as well. Did you not know that? Did you not know? So that's what that person kept on telling the personnel in the airport. And you know what happened? There were actually plenty of people surrounding that person who sympathized. The sympathy went this way. Uy, you should have, because there was someone who reported. There was someone who reported. A personnel in the airport contacted someone whom I also know about this. The viewers, there are members of the crowd who sympathized with the one who had to pay 12,000. Wait, did you already have that stipulated in your... Why is it in a fine print? It should not be in a fine print in the ticket. It should have been... So the sympathy went to the supposed victim. Guess what? The airline did not succumb to the complaint of the victim. Because the airline stood on their ground into saying that, ma'am, if you now already know that it's a female person. Ma'am, if you say that you've been flying with us several times, then you should have known already our terms when it comes to luggage capacity. Your choice. You fly this in our airline now, or you fly this using a port, what is that? Like to go cargo. You fly this through cargo. You ship this through cargo, which means that it will not reach your place on the day that you'll arrive on the day that you'll arrive in Manila within your flight. She opted to really take it on her flight, and so she paid 12,000 pesos. Another thing, what complicated it is when a woman, an aunt of this person, knew what happened. You know what they did? In the vernacular. Allow me to, for the record, off the record, though this is in video recording, off the record, what did that aunt, what did the family of this girl say? Abusaduha man ng airline na. Luuya man to siya, nga dakua man siya bayaran. So see, where did the sympathy go? To the supposed victim. One of the aunts of that woman paid the 12,000. But if you think about it, whose fault was it in the first place? Is it the fault of the airline for setting their terms? Is it the fault of the personnel of the airline in the airport at the time? No. It was the fault with in our case when we talked about it, in whatever angle you look at it, it's the fault of the person flying to Manila. The terms are found in the ticket. No matter how fine the print is, it is a responsibility of every passenger to read fully the terms in the ticket. Plus, For you to carry on so much luggage, you should be ready of the consequence of carrying that weight with you. See, what she did was to appeal to force. There was an appeal to pity, especially that it reached the aunts, and when that communication reached the aunts, there was an attempt of appealing to mercy in the messages. This happened to a family relative, so I'm well aware of what happened. This happened to a family relative of ours. So in that case, we would really say there was really no use of the mental thinking at that point. Everything was ruled with emotion. Another fallacy, ad populum or appeal to the majority, appeal to the majority or using a bandwagon. The idea here is presented as acceptable because a lot of people have already accepted it. Just because so many accepted it doesn't mean that it's correct. But that's a fallacy that people might incorporate. How does it work? Here's an example. Every boy your age already has a girlfriend, so you should go and find one. Like, if you are in a batch and that so many of your batchmates are already have their respective families, it doesn't mean that you should also pressure yourself into having one. Just because so many are into that practice doesn't mean that you should do the same. Like, if you're surrounded with a group of friends, if you have a group of friends who are into the use of illegal drugs, and if they try to convince you and they say, oh, you should do this with us, or else we will not anymore be afraid to you. We are so many of us in this group are doing it. If you don't do this like us, then sorry, you don't anymore belong to our group. Two fallacies are at work in that situation. The first one is the fallacy to ad populum or appeal to majority. So many of us in the group are doing it, so you should do the same. Second, there's an appeal to threat or baculum. If you do not do this like us, we will not anymore include you in our group. They are threatening you of ousting you from the group if you don't do what they are doing. So see, a fallacy. Another fallacy, ad antiquitatem or an appeal to tradition. That the idea is acceptable because it has been true for a long time. Tradition, there is some form of truth in tradition. Yes, I won't deny that. But it doesn't mean that if that's the traditional practice, then that's an absolute truth. Just because it was traditionally introduced to us doesn't mean that the times of today cannot change it. I mean, when it was made a tradition, it was in relation to the situation of before. I mean, that's why it's called a tradition. It takes its origin in our ancestry. In the passage of time, things happen. Events provide changes to occurrences. And so, traditions can change. It doesn't mean that if you are told that it has already been the tradition of our family that everyone at the age of 21 should get married, then you should also get married. That's antiquitatem and bandwagoning it all, working all together. It is the tradition in this family, it is the tradition in our school that this and that and this and that. Then you should not force yourself to work on that tradition all the while. Traditions can be challenged. The example here that we have is marriage has traditionally been a man and a woman, therefore a gay marriage should not be allowed. Several cultures have challenged this example. While it's true that tradition provides that marriage be done between a man and a woman only, there are several practices and cultures out there who believe that marriage is a commitment between two individuals who are in love, regardless of gender or of sex. That's why they like to challenge that old traditional practice of marriage. Another tradition, um, the tradition of circumcision. Circumcision is a tradition. There are those people, though, maybe, who do not go into that traditional practice, because they find it all right. Aside from it also being a traditional practice, there's also a hygienic explanation for the practice of circumcision. Still, there are others who would not do it. Just because tradition demanded it for them doesn't mean that they will follow it. Ad verecundiam is a misuse of authority. Here's the example. 4 out of 5 dentists agree that brushing your teeth makes your life meaningful. You may mention of an authority here, like the word dentists are persons of authority, but the question here is, are they the right persons to speak of what makes life meaningful? Comes the issue on authority being misused. For instance, the president might say, the Philippines right now is, the Philippines right now is, the president of any country, not just the Philippines, the president of that country might say, our country right now has deteriorated in terms of its health opportunities. Between that between the president saying that and a person in the area or department that concerns health, who between the two would you consider to be more of a reliable source? I'm not saying the president can't be a source of it, but let's consider who between the two can come out as a better source of such statement. Will it be the person who supersees several areas and sectors in the society, or the person who finds a focus on the sector related to health? Because if it were me, I would consider and give more regard to the person who is concerned of that particular sector. Is it all right for a parent lang ha, like a regular parent to say, the teaching industry in the Philippines has deteriorated? For a regular parent to just say that? We might as well listen to someone who works in the industry, or she is probably the person who is in charge of that industry, for it to sound truthful and acceptable. The authority will not be misused if that authority comes to be the right person to represent that statement. Other fallacies, dicto simpliciter. I think we didn't have dicto simpliciter last time. This is an argument based on an unqualified generalization, meaning there was already a generalization made and the support of it is missing or insufficient. Like this example, exercise is good, therefore everybody should exercise. Exercise is good is a good statement, but is it enough? Is it enough to come up with a conclusion that says that everybody should exercise? Take note, exercise is good has not yet presented in completeness the benefits that everyone could get in the doing of exercise. The word exercise is good is too broad. I mean, the word good in that statement, in the first statement, is too good. It's too broad in itself. If it were to be brought down into what benefits people will get should everyone do exercise, then that's when we could put the last statement, that therefore statement. Fallacy of composition. This happens when there is an assumption that what is true of a part is true for the whole. Generalizability in research. We apply that in research because we're taking a sample out of the population. But philosophy won't consider it. Example, each brick in that building weighs less than a pound. Therefore, the building weighs less than a pound. The composition or characteristic to a part cannot be right away true to the entirety of the whole or to the entirety or of the whole. It may be true to a part, it may be true to a component, but it's not all the while true to the totality of the unit. If you talk of a qualitative research, in qualitative research, this really makes sense. Because in a qualitative research where we are focusing only on a few, and we are really providing the details of these few, we cannot make the results truthful to all of the persons where these few are found. But for the conduct of a quantitative research, where we have quite exactly a good number of persons to represent the sample, we can defray from the fallacy of composition. The fallacy of division. This is assuming that what is true for the whole is true for its parts. This is the reverse of the fallacy of composition. Parts to whole, composition; whole to parts, fallacy of division. For example, you come from a family of doctors and lawyers, and surely you can do better in that course, any course related to medicine or to law. Or, I don't know if you've heard of this. Hala, your father is a teacher. Your mother is also a teacher. You should become a teacher as well when you grow up. Common expressions that are like that. Or, Huy, I heard that your family is a family of religious people. Why is it that you are not a religious one? What they are doing is they are looking at the characteristics of the whole and putting these characteristics to all of the individual units. At some point, it would find, at some point, the general population, that 90% listening to that line will find some truth in it. Yes, no, Bitono, they are all religious people. What seems to be different? Why is it that this person, this child is different from them? I think that child is just a hard-headed child. That child is just really a rude child. They provide judgments already because of the falsehood of attributing characteristics coming from the general group to the specific members. Hasty generalization. This generalization is reached too hastily. There are too few instances or evidences to support such a conclusion. For instance, here, you cannot speak French. I cannot speak French. Carla cannot speak French. Therefore, nobody in the school can speak French. There is still a question on how feasible or not feasible an event is, and so we need substance to support its truthfulness. Petition, how do we pronounce this fallacy, the one which translates to begging the question? How did we pronounce this when you were in grade 9? Thea. You can remember it, except that you are already laughing at yourself. I think I just did one of the fallacies already. No, because the idea thereby is I've already told this to the class. So everyone in that class should be able to remember. What fallacy was that? What fallacy was that, Leija? I don't know. The fallacy of I've shared this to the group. I expect all of the group to be able to recall this all the time. Is that ad populum? It's in this slide. It's in this slide. What is it, Thea? Correct. It's the division fallacy. See, my assumption here is I have already been preset that everyone in the group knows this because I've shared this to the whole group. So if I pick someone out from that group, then that person should be able to give an answer which is one that I've already shared to everybody. See, look at what we are doing now. We are rationalizing our activity with the fallacies that we have already known so far. I don't care if I made a fallacy, I'll still ask. How do we pronounce this? A lie. The one which translates to begging the question. What's petitisyo? Petitisyo, ha? IC. How do we pronounce this IC? You got the petition part right. Again, the second part. Ooh, Princy. Prin and PE, you got that part right. The second syllable needs to be worked out. Chelsea. Is Chelsea here? Is Chelsea in the call? There, Chelsea. How do we pronounce this fallacy, Chelsea? The one that is not in English. Ooh. I'd like to ask the news. Let me just want. I just want to know if the new students have an idea of this one. Clarence, how do we pronounce this fallacy? The one which is not in English. Oh, Naika. What about Naika? Again. As for the PE part, actually, I see got that one right. The issue here is with the second syllable. Well, Lorraine, you should have not typed it in. It should have not been typed in, Lorraine. But Lorraine, okay, got that right. We pronounce that as Leija. How do we pronounce it, Leija? Principii. Actually, it's not to be pronounced as Peticio Principii. It was just me. And I felt like it sounded nice as Principii. It's Printhi, PE. Printhi. Like Reduction. My name is not supposed to be Simplicio. It's Simplicio. It is. If your name has a Latin denotation to it, or a Spanish denotation, because Simplicio is not in English. If it has a C letter with a Spanish denotation, it is to be pronounced with a uh, like, for instance, Tiburcio. Tiburcio. It can also be pronounced Tiburcio. Simplicio. Just don't pronounce it as Simplicio. It doesn't sound right. Simplicio. Peticio Principii. Simplicio Principii. Peticio Principii. Or begging the question. This is assuming that the thing or idea to be proven is true, even if it has yet, take note, it is yet to be proven. However, you're already assuming that it is true. For example, God exists because the Bible says so. Why we can trust what the Bible? Why can we trust what the Bible says? Easy, because the Bible is the Word of God. When in the first place you have yet to prove the existence of God, according to that statement. False cause, or the post hoc fallacy, which is an assumption that a cause-effect relationship exists between unrelated events. There's a longer name for the false cause fallacy. Recall what that longer name is. Blank, 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 blank. Because of this, then this. That's the translation of it in English. So it begins with post hoc. Post hoc, comma, ergo, propter, hoc. False cause fallacy. Because of this, then this happens. That's the longer version of it. False, post hoc, ergo, propter, hoc. Or it's just commonly identified as the false cause or post hoc fallacy. For instance, every time you wear your red scarf, you cry. And so you should get rid of that red scarf. The wearing of the red scarf and the act of crying are two unrelated events. But you are making it a point that the presence of the red scarf or the wearing of the red scarf is the reason why you cry. And so that doesn't make sense. Or a situation that I've shared to you when you were in debate with me before. Who among you here has a nice handwriting or penmanship? Then students in the class would say, Ma'am, sir, it's this person. Okay, that student will be our class secretary. I tell you, the handwriting is never a requirement for whosoever is the secretary. Especially that laptops are now a thing. The handwriting is not anymore a requirement. Also, teachers' wrong mindset. Who's the first student in this class? Okay. So that student will be our class mayor. Let's just have him as our class mayor. Let's just have her as our class mayor. The honors that the student get or that the students get in the ranking have nothing to do with their ability to perform leadership. Well, the correlation may be strong, but leadership stands as a separate characteristic over academic achievements. There are people who don't excel well in academics, but if you give leadership abilities to them, they are so good at it. What about this? Who is the most beautiful student and the most handsome student in this class? Wow, I see really said me. Let's make them our ambassadors of goodwill, our muse and Prince Charming. I think that's just fine. I personally now I don't see any false cause or post hoc fallacy there. Because if you want your class to be represented well, should there be an event, you should let the students who can be well packed, who are well packaged, represent your class. Diba? You should look for a face that could be brought to the mall. If you cannot sell that face in the mall, let that person stay in the chair. Not perhaps as the I sound so rude there. What if, sir, he's not even handsome for others? Oh, that's what's going to put a question on what makes someone handsome. Yeah, that's a good point as well. There's now a challenge of what's the definition of handsome. I've been to a number of advisory classes where as harsh, as rude as it may sound, I had a muse who was short, like a short person. I had a Prince Charming who was really lanky. In the vernacular, usang ubo na laikwangan, madisassemble dyan na yung lawas. I had that kind of Prince Charming. I had a muse who had appeared quite, uh, how will I, a muse, I would not want to use the bitchy term, but that's the kind of personality of that person. And the question there is, are they really the ones who should be ambassadors of goodwill of the class? So again, that's where IC's question will be posed. What will be our definition of handsome? What will be our definition of beautiful? If we confine it with the looks, then we need to have our agreement. The consensus or the agreement needs to be met. That's what shall constitute our truth, our version of truth regarding a beautiful and a handsome person. If we don't settle with the physicalities of it, then that still needs to be understood or be met at an agreement by many. And that will be our version of the reality or of truth regarding a handsome and a beautiful person. All of these, by the way, are just few of the many fallacies that we could possibly make, or our the persons we are communicating with could possibly make. But at least we are already aware of the possibility that when they present their form or version of truth to us, their reasoning might actually be faulty. If not faulty, their reasoning might actually be touched with biases. What is a bias? A bias is a personal view of a person towards anything. That perhaps even before the act of communication, there was already this preconceived notion or impression that a person has already developed even before listening to others. We will deal with biases on Thursday, and we will proceed with the checking of your answers for the 5 questions found on the module. For that will all for this morning. Goodbye and thank you, grade 11. See you in oral com when I end this call.